משה, אין לי אוזנייה. ביי. תסמסו לי מה שצריך, בסדר? אני רואה עם הטלפון. אוקיי, ביי. ההקדמה נובעת מהעובדה שהיום ישוחררו 111 מחבלים לרצועת עזה מתוך 183 שישוחררו היום, מה שאומר שאלה תחילת ההכנות של חמאס בגלל מפגן הרבה יותר רחב שהם רוצים לעשות במהלך היום בעיר עזה בדיוק, ולכן הם רוצים להגדיל את הכל. עוד נקודה מתקשרת למה שאוהד ציין קודם, ראינו על הפודיום איזה מצלמה? איפה שהציגה לפינט, כרגע איפה שהציגה לפור להשתחרר, הם כבר שמו את התמונות של כל הבכירים שהם הודו שלשום שיצאו מבחינת חמאס, וגם את זה אני רואה בשיח הפלסטיני, האמירה כאן לציבור. All right, welcome to ILTV's special live broadcast. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and today we await the return of 3 hostages, Israeli-American Keith Siegel, Ofer Calderon, and Yarden Bibas. Today marks the 4th release of hostages in this first phase of the Qatar-mediated ceasefire deal. Today it's all men being released. And we have here at Hostages Square, we have Shosh Bedrosian joining us, and with me, Kalev Ben David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
A pleasure.
It's going to be a very bittersweet, very emotional day today.
Right. A very different atmosphere already between this and the other hostage releases. Much more subdued atmosphere for 2 reasons. One, it's being done in the early morning hours, which is probably a deliberate decision by Hamas to avoid some of those chaotic scenes we've seen. And the other is also, we have to say, Yarden Bibas, his release, knowing, of course, the uncertain fate of his wife and 2 young children, and thinking about him, even though we did see him just a few minutes ago there in Khan Yunis, looking in good condition, but of course just thinking about his situation changes the tone of this hostage release.
Absolutely. So we're already seeing images early this morning of Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon being transferred over to the Red Cross. We are waiting now for Israeli-American hostage Keith Siegel to be released, to be transferred over to the Red Cross. Now, some, striking images that we're seeing, and right off the bat, you can contrast this with what we saw on Thursday's release. The chaotic scenes, the mobs of Palestinians. This is very, very well organized. They did it early in the morning so that there wouldn't be these same scenes that we saw on Thursday.
Right. First of all, we should note this is the same sick show that Hamas has put up with the other hostage releases, where they make the hostages
another PR show,
go up on stage, obviously direct them to wave to the crowds. They give them this ridiculous certificate. So this is further just abuse of the hostages, of course, which is disturbing to see. But yes, we are not seeing this chaotic crowd scenes that especially we saw on Thursday. That was so disturbing to see, especially with, for example, Arbel, Yehud, to see that. So it's more controlled. We'll see how it goes with Keith Siegel, who's going to be not yet been released. His release, I believe, will be in Gaza City, and whether it'll also be under control. But definitely a more subdued atmosphere, and I think, again, deliberate decision by Hamas to do it this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our viewers have been expressing concern for Yarden Bibas throughout this, the entire 484 days that he's been in captivity. He's being released today, and we're not going to be seeing these joyous reunions with his family. He's been held for 84 days, and he was told in November in a cruel propaganda video, that his wife and 2 small boys, Kfir and Ariel,
were murdered.
Right.
Again, we don't have confirmation of this.
Correct.
The IDF has expressed grave concern for their well-being, and Israel has demanded through mediators that Hamas reveal the details, the fate of his wife Shiri and his 2 young boys. Hamas has so far refused this request, this demand, and so today he is being released, but he does not know yet the fate of his wife and his 2 small children.
Right. We don't know. Well, we don't know what's in his mind, what he believes. We are not, we're being careful, according to the official Israeli sources, not to give any kind of definitive answer about what happened to his wife and 2 children. He may have already accepted or decided in his mind what their fate are. So we don't know. We'll only know that later. But look at the contrast between him and Ofer Calderon, who is 2 teenage children who were kidnapped with him were released earlier. The mother of his children, his ex-wife Hadass, was not. She's been one of the most visible figures. I've interviewed her several times, and perhaps you have too. She's been all over the media. So we know she'll be waiting, Hadass Calderon, for him. He'll have his 2 children. Here are these 2 men going together, one knowing he's going to be going back to be reunited with his family, has that certainty, and the other, at the very least, has that uncertainty. The contrast between these, as a father, as a father of 2 children, I just feel for him, and I think of the contrast between these 2 men as they make their way back to Israel.
Absolutely. And we're seeing now visuals of the IDF helicopter that's being dispatched to transfer Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon, 2 fathers who have been held in captivity for over 15 months, to take them to the Re'im military base, where they will be examined, a preliminary examination, and reunited with their families. Now, we talked about this PR show that Hamas is putting on. From the images, the initial images that we've seen, we see that Ofer Calderon, Yarden Bibas, they're clean-shaven.
Right.
They're walking. They seem in good condition. However, what we do know from the video, for example, released back in November, we saw a very different picture of Yarden Bibas with a very long beard, very thin, in a very difficult mental state. And more than that, we've heard testimonies from hostages who have been released, who were held with these 2 men, and they have detailed horrific conditions, that these men were kept underground in tunnels, in cages, behind bars in cages. So very different reality than what Hamas is trying to portray here today.
Lidar, we've seen that as a pattern.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we have seen, for example, some of the young women that have been released looking, as you said before, they put them in army uniforms, which were not their original uniforms, of course. They appear, as you said, in decent condition and good spirits. But in the days following their release, we're hearing testimony about what they actually endured during their time, the months of being held underground in a tunnel, some of the threats they faced from their Hamas captors. And we know that it's a deliberate effort being made by Hamas, in a sense, to clean up the act of what they're doing in order to present a more acceptable picture of the released hostages. So we have that testimony, and we have to assume that's exactly what's happening here in this show that Hamas is putting on for us this morning.
So we saw Ofer Calderon being released first this morning, being transferred over to the Red Cross. We have received preliminary reports that the 2 men have been transferred into the hands of the IDF now, and are making their way towards the Re'im military base in Israel. And then they will be dispatched to hospitals, to Sheba Hospital, to Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, to reunite with their families and to undergo medical testing. And we're seeing here images now of Ofer Calderon. You know, I want to just remind our viewers, Ofer Calderon, he is a French Israeli citizen.
Correct.
54 years old. He spent the last 2 birthdays in Gaza, and he was kidnapped on October 7th with his 2 children, Sahar and Erez.
Yes.
2 children. Erez, I believe, was 11 years old at the time. He celebrated recently his bar mitzvah without his father being there, and they escaped initially. They were in their bomb shelter on October 7th when they heard the sirens. When terrorists entered their home, they escaped through the window and managed to hide in the bushes for some time until the terrorists eventually discovered them and kidnapped them into Gaza. Hadass Calderon, as you mentioned, she was on the phone with her children.
Right, she was in another location.
In another location.
And her story is remarkable.
As well, absolutely.
How she avoided capture and fighting back against the terrorists, holding the door.
For hours.
For hours to her shelter. It's almost unbelievable. But if you meet her and you talk with her.
She's a formidable woman.
Formidable woman.
Absolutely.
And it becomes more understandable, believable that she's been able to do it, and she was able to hold off the terrorists and do it. And she's been one of the major public figures, I think, in the struggle, the public struggle to get a hostage deal accepted and pressure other governments, including, you mentioned, we should mention, because that is significant, Ofer Calderon, a French citizen, and Keith, the other hostage to be released,
American
Keith
citizen,
Siegel,
yeah.
an American citizen.
And Yarden Bibas of Argentinian origin, I believe.
Right, yes.
Yeah. And, you know, Hadass has been, as you said, a prominent voice. She's been a prominent voice in advocating for the release of her children. And even since the release of her children, she's been a very prominent voice in advocating for her ex-husband, Ofer Calderon. So really a formidable woman, and their stories are remarkable. You know, she also lost her mother on October 7th and her niece.
Yes.
So really
well,
a
that
tragic...
whole extended that family, it's an extended family, all on the kibbutz, that suffered unbelievable tragedy. And of course, I remember speaking with her at the time of the first hostage release, when her 2 young children were released, and the joy she had. But this was only just a couple of months after, of course, she had lost, you know, family members. So it's just been an incredible sort of roller coaster for the extended Calderon family. And you just imagine what they're experiencing today.
And I hope that today they will be able to have some sort of closure.
Sure.
The children to be reunited with their families, and Hadass to finally be able to rehabilitate. But again, she said that she will not feel complete until all of the hostages are returned home. And she, I think, does not intend to stop advocating on behalf of all the hostages.
Right.
Because after today's release, we are supposed to have 79 hostages still being held by Hamas. And we've just gotten word that Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas have been transferred over into Israeli territory. They are now on Israeli soil, so they have officially returned home. Very bittersweet reunion it's going to be for Yarden Bibas with his family.
And we should note, we are going now into an area of the hostage release that may be a little more challenging for the public that cares about them, because we don't know as you mentioned before, in terms of the other members of the Bibas family, the 2 young children, and of course Yarden's wife. We don't know the condition of the remaining people to be. We don't exactly. We know that several of them have been reported dead. So Israel will be receiving bodies. So we don't exactly know who yet. So people should steel themselves. Those early scenes that we saw, those first few hostage releases, really were, I would say, almost joyous occasions, despite, of course, some of the difficult scenes that we saw at the moment of their release in Gaza. Okay.
So we're hearing now behind us applause, cheers, as they have announced officially in Hostages Square. They're announcing on the loudspeakers that Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas are now officially in Israel. So cheers erupting here in Hostages Square. Really,
that prayer,
some good
the
news.
Shechianu prayer that we have arrived thank God we have arrived at this moment.
Yeah.
And it is, you could see here, it's not a huge crowd. It's early in the morning in Tel Aviv. It's not similar to the other crowds you saw, but there are a number of people here, several dozen people, and you get the relief. Definitely,
we're seeing people slowly streaming
right.
in. Again, Hamas, I think, released the hostages, especially early this morning. They were expected to be released a bit later, towards the early afternoon, but they decided to release them first thing in the morning. And now, if we see the visuals now on the screens in front of us, we're seeing the pictures of Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas, and we see the contrast. They've put Ofer Calderon in, again, their mock military uniform, want to convey that he is some kind of reservist in the Israeli army.
But of course that's a lie.
Not
basically.
true, of course.
Of course he was not captured in military duty. He's no way a soldier. They're trying to convey, again, what Hamas is trying to do is create a sort of image that this is some kind of prisoner swap.
Right.
But it's not.
Absolutely not.
Because the Israelis in Gaza are hostages. They are not prisoners. There is a distinction. We haven't mentioned, of course, we're going to see dozens of Palestinian prisoners released today, again, where some serious security prisoners, those with blood on their hands. Again, a difficult day for those Israelis who perhaps have loved ones, relatives who were murdered by some or of the Palestinians who were released today or involved in the murder of those people. So, well, of course, here in Hostage Square, there's joy. We always have to keep in mind what a bittersweet and even painful day this is for many Israelis.
Absolutely. And I want to turn now to Shosh, who is standing amidst the crowd here in Hostages Square. Let's see. Shosh, can you hear us? Are you with us?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Shosh?
Well, yeah, it's a very emotional morning here in Hostage Square, Lidar. To see these two hostages come out, emotional for a few reasons. Of course, Ofer, the last time anyone saw him, known to have seen him, were his two children who were held with him in Hamas captivity. They were released in November of 2023 as part of the first ceasefire deal. But here in the crowd in Hostage Square, for people to see Yarden Bibas walk out on his own 2 feet is a moment that brings pain, it brings joy, it brings complexities. Yarden is walking out of Hamas captivity after 480 days without his wife, Shiri, without his 2 young children, Kafir and Ariel. It is uncertain, it's unclear of what lies ahead of him. I think the moment we all saw him walk out on this live stream, on this Hamas-created stage and show in Gaza was emotional. It was emotional for me. We've seen so much joy in these hostage releases, but to see Yarden Bibas walk out on his own 2 feet, it's because you know that there is a world ahead of him that is so uncertain. The IDF spokesperson said last weekend, there is grave concern for the fate of Shiri, Kafir, and Ariel. Those 2 children are the youngest in Hamas captivity at this point. To see a father walk out of Hamas captivity without his entire family is something that your mind really can't even grasp. It's something that your mind knows that the story of this family brings tragedy, it brings heartache, it brings confusion. This is a story that captivated the entire world. Why? Because it was all caught on camera, their abduction. You saw Shiri gripping her 2 red-headed children, 2 young children so tight in her arms with this look of despair, confusion, unknown of what was happening. And then you see another video of Yarden Bibas being taken separately from his own family. He had a wound to his head. He was bleeding. We know he suffered an injury from October 7th. It's unclear what it is at this time. But to see him come out, I really don't have the words for it. We reported on this, but the story of this family is one that the Bibas family has said will bring complexities in the future. I know here when he was released, tears just flowing down people's faces because they know that there is his whole family is left behind. As we said, the story captivated the entire world. And here in Hostage Square, it's continued to fill up. Remember, it's Shabbat here in Israel. This is the time where people shut off. This is the time people don't work. But we continue to say the soul of the nation here in Israel comes out to support these chatufim, these hostages, as a day to rejoice, a day to see these people come back alive on their own 2 feet is an incredible moment. So at the beginning, there weren't a lot of people, but as you can see, this is Israel. More people will come and come just to see good news. And so we know that these families will be reunited with their loved ones on Re'im Air Base. That's where they will receive their initial checkups. And then we will see where they will be taken to hospitals next for more medical evaluation. We saw them walk out on their own 2 feet. It's unclear, what other injuries they might have experienced in captivity, what other injuries have not even at all been treated since October 7th. As we saw, Hamas put on an entire show once again, marking the end of 420 days of brutal captivity, the way that they do every single time. This release started a little bit earlier. Lidar?
Thank you, Shosh. And we've just gotten word now that the Red Cross is on its way to pick up Keith Siegel, the 3rd hostage that is set to be released today. And we know that Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas are now on Israeli soil. So excellent news today. So Keith Siegel, the first American hostage, the oldest American hostage to be released today.
And that maybe we should make notice, of course, of the role of the Trump administration and President Trump in this release. Of course, he came into office saying special emphasis, of course, on the Americans, those with this American citizenship being held, but saying that he wanted to see all the hostages released. And we have to take note of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit this week to Washington, where he will meet in a few days in the White House with President Trump. Hugely significant to what we're seeing right now, because that will really be the beginning of what we call phase 2 of the hostage deal, in which discussions will begin about possible arrangements in Gaza, the so-called day after in Gaza, creating a Gaza that is free of Hamas governance, and that is crucial to the hostage releases, Ladar, because in order for the release of all the remaining hostages, that has to be done during the period in which these discussions are taking place, and some kind of deal is reached or arrangement is reached with the Trump administration in order to carry out all the remaining hostages. We've heard President Trump raise some interesting, for some controversial ideas just in the last few days about temporary relocating at least some residents of northern Gaza outside into other neighbor Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan, something those countries and the Palestinians have rejected. But it's just a sign that there's a certain momentum that has developed. We are now well into the release of the hostage. A lot of people were skeptical we would reach this stage. And to tell you the truth, it's happened in a way even more quickly than a lot of people anticipated. A lot of people anticipated delays. A lot of people anticipated we might even reach this point in the deal. And here we are, the release of these, start releasing of the male hostages.
Well, a lot of incentives for Hamas to go ahead and release these male hostages, release these 33 hostages in the first phase of the deal. We know that the Rafah crossing has now been opened. Correct. The IDF withdrawing from Rafah, not first Netzarim, now Rafah. They opened the crossing early. They opened it yesterday as an added incentive to Hamas. And after the hostage release on Thursday, where we saw these absolutely chaotic scenes, these very dangerous scenes for Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses, Israel sent a message to Hamas through the mediator saying that if these scenes were to be repeated, Israel would close the Rafah crossing. And this is why we're seeing a very orderly, a very managed release today.
In the early morning hours, in order to avoid those kind of scenes. And we should not underestimate the changes that are happening now in the Gaza Strip. You mentioned the Rafah crossing, which has been reopened, but was a difference. International observers from the European Union are there. Back there, they at one point were there, certainly not since, again, Hamas made it impossible for them to continue there. So we have international observers on that Rafah crossing. The whole issue of that crossing has been one of the most controversial and difficult issues to reach agreement going to this. We also have U.S. security, private U.S. security contractors, basically in the Netzarim corridor, that corridor that is sort of the dividing line between southern Gaza and northern Gaza. This is, Ladar, this is unprecedented.
Absolutely.
We have, because they are armed. These are armed, basically American security forces, not officially military forces.
And I just want to comment on what we're seeing on the screen right now. We're seeing the transfer of Yarden Bibas from earlier this morning from Hamas to the Red Cross vehicles. He's looking well. He's able to walk, but of course we know that he is in a very difficult mental state.
As you said, what a difference in these scenes
compared to Thursday.
The mob scenes that we've seen.
And you can see there are, you can see that there are Palestinians there watching, but they're being kept at a great distance to ensure that the scenes from Thursday's release do not repeat themselves.
Right. And keep in mind, this is something Hamas could have done in the 3 earlier transfers, and they wanted to initially sort of create that mob scene and create that sense of like it was a kind of victory celebration with the residents of Gaza, but of course getting out of hand, and a warning from Israel that we cannot see those kind of scenes repeated. It was putting, never mind the psychological damage that you could imagine it be doing to these hostages going into those scenes. Though we have to say how heroically figures like over 81-year-old Gadi Moses. We saw the pictures later come out.
That is the victory picture. You see him walking out, surrounded by mobs of Palestinian men, shouting, spitting, trying to, touch him, and he is just walking with his head held high, smiling, as though none of this is going to faze me. He knew he was being released. He knew he was coming back into Israel, and that is the powerful, powerful image that we saw from Gadi Moses, which again shows the resilience of these hostages. Just unbelievable. And you saw, since their release on Thursday, we've learned more details. Arbel Yehud, held by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not by Hamas, she was held in isolation in a dark tunnel by herself for 482 days. I mean, the anguish, the horrors that she must have gone through is just unimaginable. Her father released a statement yesterday thanking U.S. President Donald Trump, thanking for his efforts to reach this hostage deal, and saying that she's as well as can be expected given all that she's survived.
Right, and I do want to stress how important and how decisive the resilience of the hostages and the impact has that had, because there are many people who have questioned this deal, and understandably so, because a painful price is being paid. Parents of soldiers who have been fighting in Gaza have raised objections, saying, what about the sacrifice of our sons and daughters in the Gaza Strip for this deal? The objections of those who have relatives and loved ones, as I said before, who have been killed or injured or suffered at the hands of the Palestinian terrorists that are being released in return for them. So a lot of questions. I think some of that, at least, has been mollified by the resilience of the hostages that have come out. And it's been a surprise. I think it's been a surprise for a lot of Israelis to see the resilience of these people, these young people, of someone like Gadi Moses. Of course, it may be, and a lot of people speculated about that, Hamas deliberately releasing first those who have been in the best condition, the most resilient, and it may get tougher as it goes along. But until this stage, it's been a morale booster I think, for the nation of Israel and all of those that support Israel.
And now we're seeing again the images of Yarden Bibas on the screen as he was being paraded on stage, given his certificate of being a hostage. This is what Hamas gives to all of its hostages. Here, Ofer Calderon, we're seeing him as well with his certificate, waving as being instructed to wave, and dressed, of course, in the mock military uniform, all for show. Hamas continuing with the show. But again, notably, we are noticing that Hamas has learned from these chaotic scenes that we saw on Thursday. They are not taking any chances, releasing the hostages very early in the morning with smaller crowds, keeping them at a distance to ensure a very smooth transition so that these chaotic scenes that we saw on Thursday do not repeat themselves.
Right. I should also note the images, the resilience of the hostages who come down do contrast somewhat with some of the hostage videos that were released during that period, in which they were. It's clear now, Hamas staged those videos to make that. To increase the to make it look like they were suffering greatly, which they were, of course, but that, in a sense, to avoid any giving any of the hint of the resilience and heroism of those hostages. So we do see the psychological. It's even clearer now. Was said at the time, certainly. Those hostage videos released by Hamas were part of a psychological warfare that Hamas was waging against Israel and the morale of Israel, and it was said at the time, but it's even become much clearer now when we see the resilience of the people, the defiance of the hostages that were released, even in the most extreme circumstances, those moments when they've been paraded like this, in these spectacles staged by Hamas, or in these walks through angry mobs of, for example, what we saw from Gaza Moses.
Yeah. And we are just getting word that Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon have reached Re'im, the military base. There they will undergo a preliminary sort of medical testing to see their condition, and they will be reunited with their families, and they'll be assessed whether they are stable enough to make it to Tel Aviv, to Sheba Hospital and Ichilov Hospital, or if they need to be airlifted or taken to a more nearby hospital in Beersheba, Soroka Medical Center. So but great news, they're officially in IDF hands. They've officially reached Re'im, and so they are here. And we are waiting now for the release of Keith Siegel, the first American hostage to be released, I think, in this phase of the deal. And so we're waiting to see. We see now visuals on the screen of the helicopter that brought them to that the IDF sent to pick up Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas. They are in Re'im. They are in IDF hands. They've been transferred over and are on Israeli soil. So a bit of good news. A bit of good news.
And I also want to say, we should also note, and there's been a lot of criticism against the army and Israeli institutions, understandably so, since October 7th. But the way the army has handled these hostage releases, the way the Israeli health system, the hospitals that have handled it, you really have to compliment them on the efficiency, on the way they've handled the kind of media exposure. I think it's just been the kind of right amount in terms of respecting the family's privacy, while at the same time giving the Israeli public and the world images perhaps we need to see in order to continue with it. And again, another surprise, the quickness in which some of these hostages have actually come out of hospital. You know, many people were speculating it could be, we shouldn't get our hopes up, they could be weeks in the hospital recovering. And again, the strength, the resiliency of these people, and the desire to go back home. And we heard Gaza Moses
reunited with his family.
And minutes after his release saying, you know, I'm going to do everything I can to rebuild kibbutz near Moses. I mean, this was just near Moses. I'm sorry. Gaza Moses saying kibbutz near Moses, just minutes after.
And he was concerned with his crops, with the state of Nir Oz, and that was the first thing on his mind. He wants to rebuild. Incredible.
He helped establish the winery there, and he wants to see that
he
rebuilt.
Wants to see a rebuild. rebuilt. I want to turn now back to Shosh, who is in Hostage Square amidst all the people, amidst the families, and we're seeing a lot of, Shosh, we're seeing a lot more people streaming in to Hostages Square. What can you tell us?
Held hostage by Hamas coming home. I do want to say, I want to talk about Keith Siegel for a moment. He was kidnapped from Kfar Aza. He was kidnapped with his wife, Aviva, in their own vehicle, driven into Gaza in their own car. Aviva was held with him for 50 plus days in Hamas captivity. While that was happening, I actually met Aviva back in the spring of last year. She told me what that was like. She said they were held in tunnels, held in darkness. They held each other really tight. They were counting the days together. 50 plus days. She said it was hard to breathe in there, hard to breathe as the air is tight, as it's dark. Keith is an American citizen. This is a very big deal for an American citizen to come out. He's the first American citizen to come out as a result of this hostage deal, the first phase of this deal. He is believed to be one of 3 Americans that are still alive in Hamas captivity. We're waiting for Keith to come out at this time. He has been held for 480 plus days. There was a Hamas propaganda video of him released right before Passover of last year, of April 2024. Once again, of Hamas likely forcing him to say certain things on camera as we were just days before Passover was about to start. So that was the last sign of life. Aviva, his wife, his children have had of him. He is known as a down-to-earth man, someone that loves nature. He loves his grandchildren, a soft, kind person. That's Keith Siegel. So we are waiting for him. People here in Hostage Square are waiting for him. He is the last hostage set to be released as part of today. Of course, we're expecting more hostages to come out in the very near future. There's a live stream on here. Repeated photos of Ofer, of Yarden, are on this screen. We've talked about Yarden and what a day this is for him to come out. Ofer and Yarden were taken from Kibbutz Tiroz. Nearly 80 plus people were taken from hostage from Kibbutz Tiroz. So this is a moment marking a historic moment for so many people here in Israel. Lidar?
Of course, each and every hostage with an incredible story, and we'll come back to you shortly. So, Kalev, we're waiting now to see the release of Keith Siegel. We're seeing images now again of the stage that Hamas has set up in its usual PR stunt, and we are waiting for the release of the first American hostage to be released.
So this is going to be Arab media reporting. This is going to be in the Gaza port area of Gaza City, different location. The other 2 hostages were released in Khan Yunis, which is more to the south. Also reports that they put heavy security in place there at the site where Keith Siegel is to be released. Again, trying to avoid those kind of crowd scenes. It's a little later in the day. They may be concerned that crowds will come up there. So a much more controlled environment. Clearly Hamas is trying to do. They also have to keep in mind for surely that this is an American citizen, and there'll be special attention paid towards his treatment there in terms of how he's going to be handled on his release. So certainly this is something they have to keep in mind, given the Trump warnings of the Trump administration.
It's interesting to see the order that these hostages are being released. And of course, we know that first, according to the deal, women and children were set to be released. Of course, Shiri Bibas and the 2 small Bibas children have not yet been released in violation of this agreement. And then we see after the female civilians, the female IDF observers, again, Hamas breaching that by failing to release Arbel Yehud ahead of the IDF observers. And now all men
Right.
being released today, and
Who are
for
not
the
soldiers.
who are not soldiers, all the men who are either elderly, in poor
Right.
medical condition, who are not soldiers, they are going to be released, and they're going to be released now, 3 men every single Saturday until all 33 hostages are released. In the last week, we're expecting to receive 11 of the hostages, including at some point Shiri Bibas and Kfir and Ariel, the 2 young Bibas boys. Again, Israel demanding Hamas give some kind of clarification as to why they have not been released and as to their fate. We simply don't know. Of course, the family has asked that the media does not speculate on their conditions, so we won't do that. But again, Israel has expressed grave concerns, the IDF saying they have grave concerns as to their well-being. And so it's interesting to see that they're releasing the first American hostage today,
Right.
and it's going to be interesting to see the order in which they release these men.
And a French citizen as
And
well.
a French citizen.
Again, maybe fact, we don't know exactly the thinking of Hamas. Some of their decisions haven't been totally clear, but you have to speculate that maybe the fact that for example, we don't exactly know why the Thai hostages were released. The 5 Thai hostages were released
On Thursday.
On Thursday.
Yeah.
Really seemed to come out of nowhere in this. So first of all, we don't know behind the scenes what kind of behind the scenes negotiations there could be with governments. We know some governments have tried to make their own sort of own arrangements in terms of it. We don't. The fact that is an American and a French hostage is interesting and released today. Again, I don't think that's not a surprise. Another interesting thing, and one of the men to be released, of course, Alexander Sasha Trufanov, a Russian citizen, an Israeli who holds Russian citizenship. Of course, Russia has been, I would say, supportive of Hamas during this past period. They've hosted Hamas officials in Moscow since October 7th. We haven't seen his release. We don't know why that is. Could be related to what his condition is. Again, as I said earlier, I don't want to speculate. I'm not going to go into individual names, but there is a feeling that and we know that several of the hostages that are going to be returned will not be returned alive, and that those are likely to be, or in difficult condition, those are likely to be the last of this tranche of 33 in the first phase that are going to be released. So this is going to get more difficult as it goes along.
And of course, there is growing commotion, growing talk about the fate of Shiri Bibas and the Bibas children. So it's interesting that Hamas has decided to release Yarden Bibas today. In the past couple weeks, we've seen the releases of the hostages. There have been very joyful moments. It's definitely been a boost to the morale here in Israel to see these hostages coming home, to see these wonderful reunions, these emotional, beautiful reunions with their families. It's really heartwarming. It's given Israelis a lot of optimism and hope. And now to release Yarden Bibas under these circumstances where the fate of his family is unknown is yet another cruel, I would say, psychological tactic that Hamas is waging against the Israeli public.
And it's also, by the way, highlights another failure by the International Red Cross, because one of their mandates is to be, in these kind of situations where hostages or even prisoners are being kept, that they should have access to the prisoners, they should have knowledge of the prisoners, and this is something that the Red Cross has failed to do during this entire process. They claim Hamas simply won't cooperate, but I think a lot of the criticism has been they have not been more vocal in their insistence and publicly vocal in their insistence and criticism of Hamas, putting more pressure on Hamas and on the international backers of Hamas, countries like Qatar and Turkey that do support Hamas, at the very least, to give out information about a wife, a mother, and her 2 young children. Why even at this stage are they not able to obtain even the most basic information? That is a failure of the International Red Cross throughout this process, and it's particularly highlighted today in these circumstances.
Again, the Red Cross has not seen a single hostage. Not only have they not visited the hostage, you don't hear the Red Cross making statements demanding to see the hostages. You don't hear the Red Cross making statements at all, expressing their concern for the well-being of the hostage. You essentially hear nothing from the Red Cross for almost 15 months, 16 months. You hear absolute silence from the Red Cross. The only time we hear anything from them is when they are coming to pick up the hostages, essentially an Uber service. And we've received word. Speaking of that, we've received word that the Red Cross is now on its way to the pickup point to receive Israeli-American hostage Keith Siegel. And again, the Red Cross has done absolutely nothing these past 16 months. And not only that, they've also gone along with these sort of PR shows, these farces that Hamas has been putting on, going on stage, signing documents, signing, transfer orders from Hamas, playing along with this ridiculous show that Hamas has been putting on. So really shameful, absolutely shameful, the Red Cross and these international organizations and the international community that has done so little for the hostages.
Right, and that has been, of course, criticism. And we've seen, of course, people like, for example, Hadass Calderon, Ofer Calderon's wife. We've spoken about her, who's made herself a presence, not just within Israel, because we know and we've covered the protests that have been here in Hostage Square, pressuring the Israeli government to make a deal, but also internationally in the effort of the hostage families to go, for example, to the United States and make it a public campaign there. And that is certainly one of the reasons we saw in its closing days the Biden administration pick up its pressure, and of course the Trump administration being the key factor in this the last few weeks, even before coming into office, to make sure that this day comes here. And of course Steve Witkoff, key figure, the Middle East envoy of the Trump administration, who was
made a surprise visit to Hostages Square on Thursday.
Was right here on Thursday.
Hugging the families, meeting with the families right here in Hostages Square.
Absolutely.
Really an incredible show of support, of solidarity. And of course, all of the hostages that have been released, we see their families thanking U.S. President Donald Trump, thanking Steve Witkoff for their efforts in pushing this deal through. And, I think this is a good opportunity to remind our viewers that on October 7th, Hamas not only kidnapped or murdered and raped Israelis, but they murdered and kidnapped civilians from dozens of countries, from Thailand, from the United States, from France, from Russia. I mean, dozens of countries. And we have heard very little from these countries, very little efforts from them, from the international community, to secure the release of these hostages.
Right, and that's been the subject of criticism of the hostage families. There are some countries that say we've tried to work behind the scenes, but the Trump administration took an approach of taking it public, and we saw the impact of that. So clearly, this was not something that was going to be handled behind the scenes. Really, there had to be pressure put on Hamas, but also, I repeat, on those countries, particularly Qatar, that had to, in order to reach this moment. Hamas does not stand alone. It has support. The Iranians, of course, have given Hamas support during this. Pressure had to be put on them. I don't think we have to look this in the big context, Ladar. It's not just, for example, the incoming Trump administration. This is happening after what happened with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel's successfully able to, in many ways, decapitate the military strength of Hezbollah and reduce Hamas, strip it of that ally. The fall of the Bashar Assad regime in Syria, another regime, the weakening of Iran. I think all of that was one of the factors that also pushed Hamas into the corner to back down. Remember, there were points where there was for much of the past year, a little under a year and a half, they said as a precondition to a hostage release, we need to see the full withdrawal of Israeli troops out of the Gaza Strip and the complete cessation to any military activity against Hamas. That was their precondition to get started, and it was only in the past couple of months that we saw Hamas finally back down definitively from that. Pressure from the incoming Trump administration, but also the military actions that were taken and successes Israel had against Hezbollah and the subsequent overthrow of the Bashar Assad regime in Syria.
That's absolutely a very important point. You know, Hamas has been left essentially standing alone, the so-called axis of resistance crumbling since October 7th due to Israel's military successes. You know, we don't mention that enough. Really, Israel has had a series of incredible military successes. IDF soldiers, the military, really incredible successes with Hezbollah, with Hamas, you know, weakening all these terror organizations. And, you know, as we're waiting now for Keith Siegel, the first Israeli-American hostage, I just want to remind our viewers a little bit about his story. You know, he's 65 years old. He was originally from North Carolina, an American citizen from North Carolina. He moved to Israel as a young adult, and he was abducted from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, along with his wife, Aviva Siegel, another very, very prominent voice in advocating for the release of the hostages. Now, Aviva Siegel was released back in November in the first hostage deal, and since then she's been truly an outspoken advocate, not only for the release of her husband, but for all the young women who were in Gaza. And I mean, really, she's been traveling around the world to share their stories, the stories of the young women that she was held with in Gaza during her time there. And, you know, she said recently in an interview that when she was set to be released back in November 2023, Hamas did not allow her initially to say goodbye to her husband, to say goodbye to Keith, and she insisted and said that if she wasn't allowed to say goodbye to him, she would not leave. She refused. And so eventually they let her say goodbye to him, and she parted with him, saying she didn't know whether she would see him again. And she said that she said one statement to him, a really strong and powerful sentence. She said, "Stay strong for me, and I will stay strong for you." This is her last words, her parting words to her husband, Keith Siegel. And today they are set to be reunited. So truly, truly a joyous day for Keith and Aviva Siegel to be reunited after such a long time.
Right. You know, there's two things that I've noticed in speaking with the families and loved ones of the hostages. One is how tight-knit that circle of communities is in what we call Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope area. I mean, these are true pioneers, the pioneering spirit of Israel. People who come from those kibbutzim and those communities that have suffered near Oz and Berry, Kfar Aza, have suffered so terribly, and the resilience of that people and how they all feel they're connected with each other in that community. Another thing, how many of them are Olim, immigrants to Israel? You met Keith Siegel. I have to say, myself, as an American immigrant to Israel, feel this, and how many of them, that whole community, many from South America. I've spoken with many of the families who have come from, for example, Argentina. We've seen many come from France, many of the communities down there, from Britain, and also how much of a spirit they have. Emily Damari, also, by the way, as a soldier, I would mention her. Just these people that come, the pioneering spirit of immigrants from Western countries, giving up their lives, their comfortable lives in some degree, to come and settle in one of the most challenging areas of Israel. I should say it's one of those who have been down there know it's one of the and everyone, they all have commented, one of the prettiest areas of Israel, but it's challenging. Remember, they've gone through years, decades of constant rocket attacks and sometimes terror attacks from Gaza leading up to October 7th, and just how much that a lot of people question that pioneering ethos in Israel, and how much that is still on display and has been displayed on October 7th among all of these communities and individuals from that Gaza envelope area.
Absolutely. You know, many of the families that are living in these kibbutzim, especially in Nir Oz, they really are pioneers. They came here years ago. They're second, third generation today, and they essentially built up these communities. And, you know, we've both visited Nir Oz, Kfar Aza many times since October 7th. And one of the things that always strikes me is just how beautiful these communities are when you're walking through them. I mean, of course, now absolute devastation, but there's sort of this beautiful, quiet, beautiful peace when you walk through these communities, and you can really see what incredible communities they've built. And it's also important to note that many of these people are peace activists.
100%. And
they were, you know, inviting Palestinians from Gaza into their homes. They were working side by side for them. They were driving them to get medical services here in Israel. I mean, these were all peace activists hoping for a better future. And, you know, then October 7th happened and, of course, shattered their worldviews.
Absolutely. And so many involved in these coexistent projects. I even knew a couple of them. And it just was shocking to see. By the way, this goes back a little to your point about the fact that during the October 7th rampage, so many the foreign workers were killed, Israeli Arabs killed, taken hostage, Bedouins, and remember, a large population of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians are Bedouin, and have relatives across, and Bedouins
and they were
killed,
speaking in Arabic, and it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
Didn't matter.
And that's why when we talk about what happened on October 7th as a pogrom, as akin to something more of what we saw in the Holocaust, it was different because it was just mindless savagery. It was just a total mindless savagery and a barbaric rampage that just reached out and basically killed and maimed and took prisoner anyone that was in their path on that day.
Yeah.
And thank God that today, for example, we're starting to see at least, I won't say closure because we're far from that in terms of closure, but at least the possibility of a revival of those communities that we just spoke about, and some of the people who've already come back have spoken of rebuilding those communities.
Absolutely. Now, I want to turn back to Shosh, who's in Hostages Square. Shosh, we're seeing a lot of people, a growing crowd. Now, I want to ask you about the process of the rehabilitation of the hostages returning today. What can you tell us? What is this process going to look like?
Right. So we know that both Ofer and Yarden are in the hands of the IDF right now, they have arrived at Reim base. And what happened there is they're reunited with their families. For Yarden, obviously a different situation than what we've seen, as his family is still in Hamas captivity, his wife Shiri, the two young children, but other family he will reunite there with. Once they are there at Reim, they will have initial checkups about their conditions. What it did look like from what we saw in these videos is that both of these two men were able to walk out on their own 2 feet, which is great. But once again, we don't know, of course, the trauma they endured that is still going on, and the injuries they might also be recovering from. They will be able to change their clothes at Reim, and they will then be sent to one of the hospitals that has created these incredible welcoming and environments for these hostages. We have Shiva Medical Center that have been taking some of these hostages where they will receive more medical treatment. We know that some of the hostages from a few weeks ago, Emily Damari, Zoron, Romy, they were in the hospital for about a week and were then released. We know that the female soldiers that were released last week are still in the hospital at this time, in addition to Agam. They recover for about a week, and they decide if they would like to go home or not based on their conditions, their vitals they look into. into and everything else. Of course, every single family who has a released loved one at this time is saying that the mental trauma will take years to endure. Right now, here in Hostage Square, there's been some videos playing. One of the emotional videos that has been playing is the wedding video of Yarden and Shiri Bibas. It's so emotional to see that because we don't know, of course, the fate of Shiri and their two young children. So here in Hostage Square, they continue to play these videos, the live stream of what's happening as we're waiting for Keith Siegel's release at this moment. As you saw in the video that we've been playing, the show that Hamas is creating is Keith Siegel is about to be released in the background of the beach, the beautiful beach Israel shares this beautiful coastline with. That's the thing about this situation, this hostage crisis, is that Israel is so close, kilometers away from where these hostages have been held. These families have been so close, yet so far away in their journeys from their loved ones in Hamas captivity. People here, large crowds have been growing. Of course, it's Shabbat. This is a day of rest for people. But when it comes to the Hattusim, the hostages, it is a different story. The people of Israel come out. Everyone here says that when the hostages leave, when the hostages feel, we feel with them. That is the soul of Israel. This is what this country is like. It's built on the strength of each other. One of the families I spoke with, actually in the crowd here, came from the 80th commemoration of Auschwitz's liberation, and they actually were there and flew to Israel afterwards. They are the descendants of Holocaust survivors. They said being here is their duty to see Israelis coming back home. They said their grandparents moved to Israel after they were liberated from Auschwitz, and because this is the place that took Jews in, this is the place that is the soul of the Jewish nation. And they said to come from Auschwitz to here, it's Israel's duty to bring everyone home. That's what they told me. So to be here to see this liberation of these three male hostages is significant. We told you that Keith Siegel is the first American hostage to be coming out of this ceasefire deal, this first phase, which is a significant development, especially because so many of the families here credit President Donald Trump. They credit his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, for helping get this deal through the finish line. Of course, President Biden has taken credit for the framework of his deal. But for so many people here, they are waiting. It is a waiting game to see Keith Siegel released. Lidar?
Absolutely a waiting game. And, in the meantime, we are seeing such emotional scenes when they're playing the video, as you said, of the Bibas family of Yarden and Shiri Bibas, their wedding photos, the photos of their two small children. It's very emotional scenes. You see people tearing up here in the crowd. And we've gotten word, and we're hearing now the applause as well. We've gotten word that Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon have been reunited with their families. So for Ofer Calderon, a very joyous reunion to see his children again. He was kidnapped with two of his children. They were released in November. So really an incredible reunion, and we should hopefully have images of that reunion soon. And for Yarden Bibas, a very bittersweet return home, as the fate of his wife Shiri and their two children still unknown. Now, Kalev, we saw a very quick and early release of Yarden Bibas, of Ofer Calderon this morning, but we're waiting now for Keith Siegel, for the Israeli-American hostage, to be released. We're waiting quite a long time.
We don't really know why. Again, we don't know the considerations if this speaks. So we could see the images there in the Gaza port, and you could see behind the coastline there, again, may have been picked because this is an easier area for the Hamas security forces to cordon off, to avoid those kind of crowd scenes. We don't know why the delay could be related to the condition of Keith Siegel. Hopefully it will be soon, but it is certainly, we hear the crowd again because let's see the Calderon family to be reunited.
Yeah.
This has been, again, one of the most high-profile situations, in part because of the efforts of Hadas Calderon. So to have them, that family be fully reunited, that immediate family be fully reunited. It's just certainly one of the going to be a highlight of the day.
Absolutely, and I have to say, these hostage releases, they really are emotional roller coasters. You see tears of sadness, tears of happiness, tears of joy, clapping, sort of really a roller coaster of emotions during these hostage releases. We saw that with the last couple releases, and we're seeing that especially here again today.
Absolutely, with the Calderon family. Unfortunately, yes, as we've been speaking, there will be a contrast with Yarden Bibas. The lack, of course, he'll have family there that will be.
His parents are still there. His siblings
Absolutely.
are there to greet him and to hug him and welcome him back.
And of course, this is going to be a joyous day to get Yarden Bibas back. I've been a lot of concern about his fate. There was an early sign of life, but a lot of questions about it. Also, his fate, as we saw, we heard again the crowd.
A lot of joy, a lot of clapping here that we're hearing in the background upon news of these reunions. So a lot of joy right now here in the Hostages Square.
Right, and as you mentioned, concern over these two men. As you mentioned, there was a released hostage that said that she saw them being held in cages and tunnels, suffering inhumane treatment. So it is certainly, with all our concern about Sherry Bibas and our children, let us the joy of seeing Yarden Bibas attain his freedom after so long.
Absolutely. We have to remember that Yarden, in November of 2023, was told by Hamas, as they were filming him, filming his reaction, that his wife and kids were killed. Of course, we don't know if that's true or not, because Hamas has used this tactic many times. They said that Daniela Gilboa was killed, only that was not true, and she was released last week. So there's still hope, there's still optimism. But we simply don't know their fate. But he's been sitting with this knowledge, this information, since November 2023.
Right. The Bibas family, we have to say, has particularly been a special case because they were the youngest children that were taken hostage. The inhumanity of taking children at that age hostage. Terrible. There was that early footage of them seemingly show them in captivity, that they were taken alive into Gaza Strip. Reports of Hamas officials saying they had been killed in an IDF airstrike, but then denied by another Hamas official saying that wasn't. So Hamas has been playing games with the fate of the Bibas family throughout this whole process until this very moment, when they are not giving any kind of information about whether they are alive or not at this stage.
And let's remember, on October 7th, the Bibas family were kidnapped. They were separated. Yarden was taken to one location, and we saw a very brutal abduction. He was beaten by mobs of Palestinians. Regular, so-called innocent civilians who participated in his abduction. We saw him put on a motorcycle. We saw him beaten. We saw him, going off into Gaza with blood all over his face. And to contrast that, we saw a barefoot Shiri Bibas clutching to her two small children, surrounded by terrorists in distress. And that was sort of the last that they have seen each other.
This is an important point, because we know that those children, based on that footage, were taken alive into the Gaza Strip. Taking an infant.
He was nine months old at the time.
As a hostage is, I would say, almost unprecedented in its cruelty.
It's barbaric. It's
unprecedented to take a child that young, and of course the 4-year-old brother. Unprecedented in its cruelty, and that only kind of highlighted the barbarity of October 7th, and that's why the Bibas family in particular, the redheads, as they were known, the two, how cruel that was.
Absolutely.
And I just underscored the cruelty of October 7th.
Absolutely. And again, we are waiting now for Keith Siegel, for Israeli-American hostage Keith Siegel, to be transferred over to the Red Cross. Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon back in the hands of Israel, back on Israeli soil, reuniting with their families as we speak in the Re'im air military base. And we are waiting now for Keith Siegel to return home. And so we're seeing again we're seeing the images now of the stage that's been set up, the Hamas propaganda show that they like to put on with each and every release. But again, today we are seeing much more organized
Absolutely.
and
Red Cross
orderly
are reportedly
release.
now well on their way there. Again, we don't know why the delay in this case, why it has not been happening. But we hope that there will be no complications with his release. Again, more. You can hear the crowd behind us again. The scenes, the news of the reunions of the Calderon family.
Oh, and we're seeing now on the screen, we just saw a glimpse of the transfer from the Red Cross to the hands of the IDF of Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas. This is on Israeli soil. This is the moment that these two men were transferred from Gaza into the hands of the IDF. So we have these first images coming up on our screens
which is
now.
what people are applauding. Seeing these first images of them, and of course we presume we're going to be either in Re'im, the military base, with their families. Presume these images will be released shortly, and that's going to be a tremendous moment to see. Certainly to see Ofer Calderon be reunited with his wife and his ex-wife and his two children. That will be an emotional.
These videos that are released of their reunions, the first time they see their families after nearly 16 months, many of them who did not know the condition. There weren't any signs of life provided for many of the hostages. And so the uncertainty, the great news at hearing they are alive and they're returning home, and these just emotional reunions, really incredible to see. And again, we're seeing the images on the screen of Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas being transferred over to the IDF. These same images are up on this huge plasma screen here at Hostages Square, where where a large crowd has gathered. We started off early in the morning with a few dozen people. Now a few hundred people gathering here in Hostages Square, awaiting the release now of the third and final hostage that's set to be released today, Keith Siegel. Again, we're waiting.
What a change in Hostages Square, Ladar, which was the scene of so much, I would say, anguish and anxiety since the October 7th passed. How many times we came here? How many times I, as a journalist, had to speak with the loved ones, the families of the hostages, when there were reports of a possible deal, or it seemed a breakthrough, when one had to ask, do you feel optimistic at this stage? And of course, sometimes saying yes, sometimes guarded optimism. And what a change just really over the past week here at Hostages Square, for people, a place for people to come and at least. Well, we're not forgetting there's so many hostages that are still left and are still decorated. These scenes for people to come here and get some closure in terms of at least some of the hostages who have been, families have been almost camped out here basically since October 7th.
Absolutely. And, you know, we are continuing to see every Saturday night people gathered here in Hostages Square calling for the release of the hostages. You know, there's a great deal of joy at this new stage of a hostage deal, the first phase, where we're expected to see the release of 33 hostages. But let's not forget that there are still 79 hostages still being held by Hamas. Their fate uncertain if we're going to be able to reach the second and third phases of this hostage deal. Negotiations are set to begin on Monday. They've been going on a little bit behind the scenes, but on Monday, the negotiations are officially set to begin. And it's a big question whether we will see the second and third phases of this deal go through.
100%. So we should there is the anxiety about whether the remainder beyond the 33 of the phase one, which we are at least now more on the optimistic side that phase one will be completed. We could say nothing is 100%, but it's definitely moved towards the positive. But a lot of questions going into the phase two and phase three, the total release. We also have to note the difficulty of those families, particularly of, for example, the soldiers being held in Gaza Strip, feel, and they've spoken about it, whether there is a kind of the unfairness of the selection process of their loved ones, the young people that are being held in the Gaza Strip, and it's been difficult for them. And some of them, they've made it clear, those families, that they do welcome these hostage releases. They're supportive of the deal, 100%, share the joy of their families. But they've spoken about their pain, their difficulty about seeing these releases happen and not even knowing yet if their sons and daughters primarily, for example, brothers and sisters, the younger people are going to be released, and feeling, Mamie, there were some that said if there was going to be a hostage release deal, it should be all for one.
I just want to stop you for a second, Caleb, because right now we are seeing the first images of the Red Cross arriving at the pickup point, for Keith Siegel, who is set to be transferred over to the Red Cross to make his way into Israel, to the Re'im base, where Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon are already there reuniting with their families. So we are just waiting to see the glimpses of Keith Siegel, to see him,
perhaps
to see the exchange, to see him transfer over from Hamas into the hands of the Red Cross. So we're just waiting for these first images, which should hopefully happen very soon.
Yes.
So we're seeing the Red Cross car making its way through the crowds, and we've seen also that not only has the crowd grown here at Hostages Square, but it seems there is quite a large crowd now also at the pickup point for Keith Siegel, something we didn't see with Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas. We see the Red Cross vehicle having to make its way through crowds of Palestinians that have gathered to watch this hostage release. So let's just hope that we don't have a repeat of the scenes that we saw on Thursday. Israel has made it very clear that if there is these chaotic scenes once again, it will close the Rafah crossing, but it seems to right now be orderly. The crowd seems to be standing at a distance.
Right.
So we're seeing very different scenes from Thursday, and we're waiting now for Keith Siegel to be transferred over to the Red Cross. Again, he's being transferred at a different point than Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas, so maybe this is why there was a slight delay in his release, and we're waiting to see these first images. Again, Hamas will likely parade him on stage as it's done with all the other hostages.
Right.
And right now, we're really going to happen at any moment.
Right.
As we're seeing these visuals, they provide each and every hostage with a certificate of being in captivity. I'm not quite sure what this certificate is. It's
yes.
absolutely ludicrous. Another form of a psychological terror that Hamas is inflicting on these hostages. And I'll remind our viewers, Keith Siegel is an Israeli American. He's originally from North Carolina, and he moved here to Israel. He's been held for over 15 months by Hamas. He was kidnapped into Gaza with his wife, Aviva. She was released in November of 2023 and is now eagerly awaiting his return. So we're seeing the Red Cross making their way onto the stage.
Right,
waiting
you
to
see the vehicle,
yeah.
something we didn't see, moving very close to the stage.
Yeah.
Part of the problem that we've seen in the previous hostage releases, it seems they do this ceremony and then there's almost like they made them do a walk of shame through crowds. You don't, why isn't the Red Cross right there at the point? And it seems like at least here they're trying to avoid that somewhat. As you said, there are more crowds there, but tremendous amount of security. That is the Gaza port. For those who, maybe it's worth mentioning, when Israel pulled out of part of the original Oslo Accords, the agreement was that the Gaza Strip would have its own port and airport. And there was a port that was constructed so that the Gaza fisheries and other ships and goods could be brought into Gaza port. And there was an airport that actually had one plane fly in during a thing. And of course, when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in a violent takeover in 2007, that became impossible, but there are the remnants of the Gaza port.
Absolutely, they've used the port, they've used the airport to smuggle in the weapons, to smuggle in the missiles that are used against Israel, that are launched into Israel. And there's no denying that the scenes we're seeing now on the screen, again, carefully orchestrated by Hamas. We see Hamas again in full military gear, something that we haven't seen over the course of the past 15 months. They've been hiding, wearing civilian clothes. Today they are out in their full military gear, but there's no denying that the scenes we're seeing now are very orderly, very stark contrast, I would say, to Thursday's scenes of absolute chaos and mayhem, where they could not control the mobs and the unruly crowds of Palestinians. And I think that on Thursday, we got a glimpse of the savagery, of the barbarity of the so-called innocent Palestinians.
Unfortunately, that is the case.
And now, as we're waiting for the first images of Keith Siegel, I want to go back to Shosh, who's in Hostages Square amidst all the people, amidst the growing crowd. Shosh, what's the atmosphere like over there now as we are awaiting the release of Keith Siegel?
Yeah, nail-biting moments here, but also very quiet. Anytime a hostage is about to be released, here in Hostage Square, it's quiet. They're watching the live stream of it all unfold. As you can see on your screen right now, you have two Red Cross volunteers, employees, standing there completely complicit, taking part of Hamas's ceremony, quote-unquote ceremony, and show that they've created to mark or commemorate the end of 480-plus days of Hamas captivity for American Israeli citizen Keith Siegel. We have said, after surviving October 7th, surviving more than 15 months of Hamas captivity, and now being forced to partake in another psychological, traumatic event of being paraded around on stage like a trophy for Hamas, has to be part of the healing process going forward for these hostages as well. We are waiting. I'm not sure what is taking so long. This has happened in the last few hostage releases as well, when we were waiting for Arbel Yehud, Gadi Moses, to be released by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We saw the chaos that unfolded in that release as well. We don't know what the wait is. It seems as if Hamas is literally standing in a line right now, waiting and waiting. As you can see on your screen, people here in Hostage Square just waiting, quietly waiting. Once Keith is likely seen on this stage here on the live stream, that is when I know this crowd will erupt. His wife, Aviva, has been a strong leader in terms of securing a deal for these hostages. She was in captivity herself with Keith. I actually spoke with her last spring about captivity. She told me she felt as if her captors had no soul, had no humanity in them. She said they were confined to tunnels, darkness, no light, barely any air to breathe. And she told me she remembers that moment where she was forced to leave Kyiv when they told her she was going back home in November of 2023. She made a promise to Kyiv, I will get you out of here. And emotional to think about that. Months later, we're now at the point where Aviva is waiting for her husband, Kyiv, to be released. They will reunite with their family, their children, at Reim military base. That is where Kyiv's first stop will be. We know that Yarden and Ofer, the other two hostages released today, have already been there. They're reuniting with their families, receiving medical checkups. As you can see, white vans are pulling up right now on your screen. Unclear if it's Red Cross vehicles, probably are. It looks like they're pulling up close to the stage right now. Everyone's hoping this is the moment. You can see Hamas as their own photographers, just waiting for Kyiv or whoever to open that door, ready for the perfect shot. It just shows you this is all orchestrated by them on purpose. Lidar?
Yeah. So we're seeing now Keith arriving, exiting the car, the first scenes of Keith being transferred over. We're waiting to see. We are waiting to see, right now we're seeing the Red Cross going on stage, signing these ridiculous documents that Hamas is putting on a show with these documents that they've whipped up to make this all seem as though it's some kind of official prisoner exchange. Of course, that is absolutely ridiculous. There's no moral equivalence between the hostages that have been kept in brutal conditions and the Palestinian terrorists with blood on their hands that are being released. But Hamas doing all of this for show. They've set up a stage. They have cameramen on the screen, as you can see, and the Red Cross, of course, playing along with this farce. The Red Cross signing these documents, and then in a few moments we will see Keith exiting the car and being paraded on stage as well before getting into the Red Cross vehicle and making his way towards Israel. I mean, really, Hamas putting on such a show.
But let's also explain what they're trying to do here in terms of this, in doing this, carrying out this ceremony as if they're signing over in some kind of formal way. It's Hamas's attempt to say, we are still in control of Gaza. We are still the government here. We're acting like we're some kind of government. We're making an international organization, the Red Cross, interface with us as if we were the legitimate government of the Gaza Strip. And it is, we have to keep in mind that we talked earlier, negotiations beginning about phase 2. Of the hostage, the ceasefire and hostage deal.
Here we have Keith exiting the car right now, making his way onto stage to be paraded by Hamas after nearly 16 months of being held in dark tunnels under Gaza. He is now being released. We're waiting for the very first images of Keith's release, the first images to see of him, to see what kind of medical condition he is. And here we go.
Yes.
We're seeing the images of Keith. We're seeing the crowd erupting here in Hostages Square, clapping, cheering. That we see that Keith is in relatively good condition in the sense that he is able to walk on his own and making his way now onto the stage for this ridiculous show that Hamas is putting on. But again, he looks very thin. We know that many of the hostages are being starved in Gaza. He looks thin, but he looks able to walk on his own 2 feet, and the crowd here erupting.
Yes.
He is given this Hamas gift bag.
Crazy.
This ridiculous show
that they're putting
and
on.
we see him
waving
frail,
the crowd,
a little bit frail.
Yes.
He's 65 years old. We know he's been held in the tunnels, no sunlight, very little air for the past 16 minutes. He looks very pale, but he is able to walk on his own 2 feet, and now he is being taken back into the Red Cross vehicle. He's going into the Red Cross vehicle now, and he will be making his way towards Israel. to be transferred to the IDF. The crowds here at Hostages Square really cheering, really happy, a lot of relief. There was a lot of tension here. There was really silence in the crowd, waiting for the first image of Keith. And as soon as we saw him, crowd here erupting with cheers and clapping.
And relief that he didn't have to walk through an angry mob.
And relief, a lot of relief.
To get to that Red Cross vehicle.
Absolutely. This was very organized, very orderly transfer of the hostages to the Red Cross. Very stark contrast to what we saw on Thursday, these chaotic scenes of unruly mobs of Palestinians clawing at the hostages. Today we are seeing a very organized, orderly show that Hamas has put on for us. Keith now making his way into the Red Cross vehicle. He will shortly make his way out of Gaza and back into Israel to be reunited with his family, reunited with his wife, Aviva, who has been one of the most prominent voices in advocating not only for his release, but for the release of all the hostages, and especially the female hostages who have been in Gaza, many of whom are now, all of whom essentially have now been released. The crowds once again clapping, cheering that Keith is now in the Red Cross vehicle. He is making his way now towards Israel, and soon he will be reunited. So a lot of clapping, smiling, happy scenes right now, you know, this is a relief.
Again, we shouldn't take it for granted, because there's been so much anxiety about these handovers and whether they would go through. And certainly, every time this is done successfully, and one of these hostages is brought back onto Israeli soil, just a sense of relief for each and every one of them as an individual. It's tremendous.
Absolutely. And you know, again, we wanna go back now to Shosh, who is standing there among the crowd. Shosh, what can you tell us? The atmosphere has suddenly turned to one of joy.
Definitely joy. I think what's unique about this moment in time is that this is not the first, not the second, not the third release at this point. I think just Israel, the whole nation of Israel, is hurting so much. And you really feel that in these tense moments as they're waiting. Of course, there were tears when Keith came out of that Red Cross vehicle, paraded onto this stage, and then handed over to the Red Cross. There were, of course, cheers that erupted, but tears, right? There's pain. There's pain in Israelis. There's pain in the Jews that are here. Anyone that can feel for these hostages and their family. As you mentioned, Keith looks weaker. He looks pale. He's 65 years old. What do you expect as an older man locked out of 480 days of captivity? Of course, people here were cheering, but I truly think that people are in awe of seeing someone of his age, of what he endured on October 7th, out on his own 2 feet. They're playing video right now of Diva, his wife, Keith's wife, before she was on her way to a military base. Now that he's in the hands of the Red Cross, that's what people are cheering about. They're hearing Aviva's voice. This is a moment she's been waiting for. Lidalia mentioned she's been a strong advocate like no other, trying to get her husband back home. He was in Hamas captivity herself with him. We know that Keith will be transferred from the Red Cross to the IDF somewhere in Gaza, then being brought back onto Israeli soil by Israelis, brought to Reim military base for initial checkups, where he will be reunited with his wife, Aviva, their children. It's emotional. We've been covering all of these releases. All of these hostages have their own stories, their own families they're coming back to. Each one of them has fought in their own different ways. They have their own backgrounds, their own nationalities. Keith Siegel is an American. He's from North Carolina. He made Aliyah. He moved to Israel 40 years ago. This is someone who is from the U.S. but moved to Israel because he believed in the nation. He lived in the South because he believed in the south as well, and living on Kfar Aza with his wife Aviva, and they were kidnapped in their own vehicle. But people here in Hostage Square, it's quiet. I think it's quiet because they're savoring every single moment they can, trying to see these hostages on this stage. It blows your mind to see people alive after all this time walking out, and this is a moment people are taking in here in Hostage Square. Lidar?
Absolutely. Keith Siegel, 65 years old, able to walk out on his own 2 feet. And we saw the same with Gadi Moses, 80 years old, almost 81 years old, both able to walk out. I mean, it really just shows the resilience of these Israeli hostages, that after 16 months in the most horrific conditions in Gaza, they are able to stand on their own 2 feet, walk out of Gaza. Really incredible images, incredible resilience and bravery displayed by these hostages.
The resilience of the hostages and of their loved ones. And we've seen footage and photos of his wife, Aviva, going to meet him, and her spirit, showing that spirit that she's displayed over this entire process. I want to go back to your point about the disgusting behavior of the crowds that we saw. We've seen at the last hostage release and now a reminder that the battle against Hamas is not just a military battle, but it's a battle that really has to be about totally recreating the culture and rebuilding the society in the Gaza Strip, creating a society that will be willing to live in peace alongside Israel. And we should take note of some other key developments just in the last couple of days. We mentioned this on our Thursday broadcast. Israel enforcing now the law preventing UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, from operating on Israeli soil. This is, of course, the UN agency. Some of its members have been accused of actually collaborating with Hamas, taking part even in the October 7th attack, of providing shelter to Hamas, hiding Hamas weapons. This new law going into effect, closing their offices in Jerusalem. But that doesn't mean that they still won't be functioning in parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
You know, a point about UNRWA, Emily Damari, the Israeli-British,
yes, this came out.
The Israeli-British hostage that was released last week, has said that she was held inside UNRWA facilities. I mean, this is really outrageous. Of course, I mean, you know, it doesn't come as a surprise to us here in Israel. We've seen UNRWA's use of its facilities for terror purposes. This is something that's been well documented throughout, not only since October 7th, but even before. And of course, we saw the UNRWA headquarters feeding electricity down to Hamas's headquarters directly beneath it. I mean, so many testimonies of UNRWA employees that held hostages in their own home. And here, Emily Damari, who was just released, saying that she was held in multiple UNRWA facilities. So really unbelievable.
Right. And this is why these phase 2 discussions that are beginning this week, and crucially at that meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump in the White House this coming week, are so important in terms of not just the, let's say, demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, of basically forcing Hamas to give up the weapons that we have seen here, that was so much on display just in the last few minutes at this handover of Keith Siegel, but also creating an entire new educational system, a system for distributing humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, because UNRWA has been in charge of that, and Hamas has exploited that, has created a black market for that humanitarian aid as a means of gaining funds during this fight.
Absolutely.
And all of that has to change, so that scenes that we just saw of Hamas, A, acting like a pseudo-government in Gaza, and B, the crowds of people who have been indoctrinated from the youngest age to hate not just Israel, and we have to stress, to hate Jews, raised in a culture of anti-Semitic hatred, creating basically a generation of terrorists. That has to change, and that has to be a part of the discussions that are done. And unfortunately, the international community, much of it has been against Israel in this fight. Norway, the government of Norway, recently just committed $27 million to UNRWA just in the past week, say as a counter to this law. And the United States has to take the lead. And I have to say, the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Elise Stefanik, has made it clear that she wants to see fundamental changes of the role of the UN and its agencies in dealing with the Palestinian issue and dealing with the issue of who is a refugee. UNRWA has perpetuated the notion that the third, fourth generations of Palestinians living in Gaza Strip are somehow still refugees. And this is something. This is a culture has to change within Gaza and within how the international community sees the Palestinian issue, in order to create some kind of society in Gaza that will be viable for the people that live there, and also one that can live in peace alongside Israel.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're receiving word that Keith is now being transferred over to the IDF. The Red Cross has transferred him, and hopefully we should be seeing images of this transfer shortly. He'll arrive at the Re'im base. He'll go through a preliminary medical examination, and they will determine his condition, and then he will be transferred over to the hospital. He will be reunited, of course, with his wife, Aviva, who has just been waiting for him to return since her release from Hamas captivity in November 2023. Now, Kalev, back to your points about the fundamental change that needs to take place in Gaza. You know, we've seen on Thursday's release, for example, images of children watching the exchange of the prisoners. We've seen this sort of indoctrination.
Not just watching, but
participating, cursing,
chanting the Hamas slogans.
And chanting the Hamas slogans and being taught that one day they will return to Tel Aviv.
Exactly.
So-called return. And it's really just this indoctrination of children. And this is something that has to stop. Has to change, because without, being taught towards coexistence, without being taught, peace, and this is stuff that, we know in UNRWA schools. We know that in UNRWA schools they are being indoctrinated. We know that they are being taught that one day they will return to Israel proper. This is the messages that small children are receiving, that, glorifying terrorism, glorifying terrorists, sort of a culture that idolizes terrorism, that idolizes death. And until they don't change this fundamentally from the ground up, there will not be...
Well, this is the issue of incitement, Ladar. That has been come from the very beginning, with Israel saying it's not enough to simply just make agreements with the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestinian entities, even these ceasefires. There has to be something. The incitement has to stop. The glorification of terrorism against Israel, sending, parading children, infants in mock suicide belts, dressing them as shaheedim, as martyrs, sending them to so-called summer camps where they're basically indoctrinated and taught to be terrorists, to be suicide bombers. All this has to end now, and that process has to start. That process, the discussion about ending that process and creating a new reality in Gaza has to begin starting tomorrow. In terms of getting, that has to be a part of this. And some of what we've heard from the Trump administration, President Trump, a lot have been debate about, for example, whether there'll be a relocation of Palestinians to other Arab nations. Practically, that would be very difficult to do. But one thing President Trump always does is when he starts a negotiation, he sets the bar very high and forces in a way to get concessions. Some of these are issues that we've been discussing about ending the incitement, the Palestinians have been very resistant to. For example, the Palestinian Authority and the so-called pay-to-slay policy, funding those terror attackers who are in Israeli prisons, giving payments to their families for carrying out, basically rewarding Palestinians for carrying out terror attacks. And these are things that Palestinians have been basically resistant to ending that kind of policy and incitement. And maybe President Trump sending a message to the Palestinians, to Hamas, to the other Palestinians, to their backers, to Qatar, Turkey. This, if you're not going to stop, be prepared for the United States to support measures by Israel of the likes of which you've never seen in the past.
Yeah. And I just want to update our viewers. So right now we know that Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon are reuniting with their families. They've reunited with their families. And Keith Siegel, the Israeli-American hostage, the third hostage being released today, has been transferred over to the IDF. He is with the IDF and making his way to the Re'im base, where he will be reunited with his wife, Aviva, after over 483 days in captivity. And I want to turn now to Shosh once again. Shosh, what is the atmosphere like now in Hostages Square? What can you tell us? What's going on there in the crowds?
Yeah, it is a little bit quiet here. People are just watching and waiting for more information, more images and videos of these released hostages to come out. People are quiet, but they're excited, they're joyful. This is a moment on the holy day of Shabbat to see loved ones coming home. It fills this nation. It fills this nation up. It fills the cup right back up. Of course, there are more hostages that need to be released. Our next release, likely next week, hopefully sooner, depending on what happens here. We want to see, and people are expecting to see more of these hostages released. Right here in Hostage Square, they're showing other men that are still in Hamas captivity. There are men that are still on this 33-person list, part of this first phase, that need to come out as well. One of those is Omer Shem Tov from Herzliya. He was taken from the Nova Music Festival, and he's listed as part of this first phase of the deal because he has asthma, he has celiac disease, he has conditions that would likely put him at risk to be in Hamas captivity for more than 480 days. This is one of the hostages and several other men that should be released and part of this deal. His family has been pushing and fighting from the United States, his cousin Liat, to his family here, his parents, his siblings. So we're expecting more of these reunifications, more of these hostages to be released. But here in Hostage Square, the mood is heavy, but the mood is filled with joy. And we mentioned that Yarden Bibas, you said, is reuniting with his family. I can't imagine what that reunification is like, considering his wife Shiri, his two young children, Kfir and Ariel, are still in Hamas captivity. It is a reunification with his family that is half missing, and we need to consider that and consider the emotions and the complexities that come into that reunification. We know that Keith is reuniting with his wife Aviva. Ofer is reuniting with his two children he was held in Hamas captivity with. They were released in November of 2023, but really in Hostage Square, people are waiting to see more of these images come out as these hostages are reunited with their loved ones who have fought tirelessly for 480 plus days to get these loved ones back home here in Israel. Midar?
Absolutely. So we have good news to report once again today. Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon back in Israel after 483 days in captivity. And Keith Siegel making his way now to the Re'im base in Israel. He's been transferred over to the IDF. You know, Kalev, we saw another successful hostage release today.
Tremendous for me, having spoken with the families of these these men tremendous joy to see their return. I do hope in the coming days we'll have more information about the Bibas family. And the focus will now shift to the White House and President Trump's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, because that is where the hostage issue and the issue of Gaza going forward, that's where the focus will be in the
Absolutely.
next
It's going to be a very intense week as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump this week in the White House, the first international leader to do so. And right now, we can see the helicopter right now arriving at the hospital with the hostages that they're going to be transferred over to the hospital for rehabilitation, for medical care at the Sheba hospital. They're going to reunite with their extended families and be given care, both for their psychological and physical needs. And so they will be reuniting with their families and spending probably the better part of the week, if not longer, at the hospital. You know, again, Keith Siegel, 65 years old, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon already making their way to the hospital. And Keith Siegel, we're waiting to hear news that he is being reunited with his wife, Aviva. And so it's been another very successful hostage release day. They are on their way to the hospital now, the 3 hostages. And next week, we are going to be seeing another 3 male hostages being released.
Let's hope that they return home safe and sound, as these 3 men did. God bless them for their return. Thank God for that. And Am Yisrael Chai is what I'll say.
Absolutely. Am Yisrael Chai. And to our viewers, this has been another successful hostage release. We have some good news to report that Ofer Calderon, Yarden Bibas, and Keith Siegel have been transferred over to the IDF. They are on Israeli soil. They have returned to their families. Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon having reunited already with their families. Keith Siegel on his way to reunite with his wife, Aviva. And really, it's really an incredible day, a joyous day, of course, bittersweet, because we still don't know the fate of the Bibas family. Shiri Bibas and her 2 little red-headed boys, Kfir and Ariel, and we await to hear news of their condition. And so bittersweet family reunion for Yarden Bibas, but he is home along with Ofer Calderon and Keith Siegel after nearly 16 months in brutal Hamas captivity. And so with that, we're going to conclude our broadcast today with a little bit of good news. On a positive note, the 3 hostages are back home, and we are going to conclude our broadcast. And again, for more updates, follow our ILTV channels. We'll be posting videos of the reunions with the families as we receive them, so follow our ILTV channels. Thank you so much for watching today, and let's hope once again for some continued good news. Thank you to our viewers, and thank you to Kalev for joining us today.
Thank you for having me with it. I say the sun is breaking out here in Hostage Square.
Absolutely.
How fitting.
How fitting, absolutely.
That the sun is breaking out
So thank
now.
you to Kalev Ben David, who joined us today, and to Shosh Bedrosian, reporting from inside the crowds at Hostage Square. Thank you to our viewers for watching, and of course continue to watch ILTV for the latest updates.
זקוף על שער הגיא והוא בדרכו במסוק כאן לפגוש להתאחד